Payday lending has two challenges. In general, the longtime opposition it has faced from lawmakers and from consumers in many states. And second, its image as a credible source for consumer lending. Stack on top of that the squeeze in credit that we all have been feeling. And the results are certainly interesting times in the industry. Joining us now is the chairman and the co-founder of the largest cash advance services in the U.S., Billy Webster of Advanced America Cash Advance Centers. Billy, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris. Nice to be here.
Well, good to have you here. You know, Billy, let's start out with this current economy. You know, during normal times, and you'll have to excuse me if I'm not completely articulate, but during normal times, your customers, the clients that use a payday lending service are already pretty much operating in a margins. You know, they tend to be not as affluent, and they tend to have to use the service. So when we get into a credit crunch now, how does that affect them, and how does that show up for you?
Well, as whether we use unprecedented like Goldman Sachs said or not, I think working middle class families, and that is our customer really is the heart of the working middle class. The median incomes are about $42,000, so they're right in the middle. They're not the most affluent, and they're not the least affluent. They all have to have a job and a checking account, but they face challenges that they have not faced before in their lifetime. If they have a mortgage, they're not only worried about paying it, they're worried about the accessibility of tuition money, credit for consumer goods, automobile credit. So they face a credit constraint that they have not faced in their lifetimes. And it translates to our customer, really, for lack of a better word, into almost a paralysis. We announced earnings yesterday, they were down year over year, our revenues were down, and a lot of that came in the fourth quarter. When the economic situation began to turn worse, almost as you all said earlier, on a minute-by-minute basis, you could see almost a paralysis set in among everybody, but certainly working middle-class families. Spending was down, whether you look at Starbucks, JCPenney, or Advance America. So it's across the board. So this is not,
give me a sense here, when somebody gets into a position when they want to or they have to go to a payday lender for a loan, is it an emergency situation, or is it tend to be a well-thought-out use of some credit facility?
It's both. Oftentimes people go because it's a one-off emergency, but oftentimes it's a well-thought-out choice. This business grew out of a single phenomenon that occurred in sort of the middle 1990s, which was the state-regulated rate that we could charge became less expensive than the cost to bounce a check. Very, very simple value proposition. When it became less expensive to get a payday advance than to do what people had typically done, back then we had a 4-day float. It's hard to remember that was the case. Now it's 24 hours. But people would use sort of their ability to write checks to, whether it's the end of their pay period or the end of the month, to sort of help facilitate difficult credit situations. And today, that difference between the cost of a bounce check and our product is almost double. The average size of a bounce check in the United States is about $65. The average fees on that check, $30 to the bank, $30 to the merchant, is about $60. You can get $60 from Advance America for $9. That's the only reason people use this service. The cost of the alternatives are more expensive.
So when a lawmaker in some state that does not want a payday lender in the state points to the fact to say, you know, you go to that payday lender, you go to Advance America, and they're going to charge you an annual, and they use this term, an annual percentage rate of 300%. Are you saying that that's not a fair comparison?
Since the beginning, we have thought consumers should understand the cost of this credit. We disclose it not only in absolute dollar terms, but as an annual percentage rate. It's extremely important to point out that none of our competitors are forced to do that. You know what the cost of a bounce check is. You know what the cost to be late on your utility bill, but you only know that cost in dollar terms. The FDIC said for the first time 2 months ago, the annual percentage rate of the average bounce check in the United States is over 3,000%. Is over 1,000%. The average annual percentage rate of a debit card return transaction is over 3,000%. So if you compare apples to apples, as consumers do intuitively, they know what it costs to do one versus the other. And that's the reason the product has been so popular over the last decade. And the industry is at fault, and we are at fault from the product grew quicker than our ability to explain its success. And so many folks hear the 391% annual percentage rate, which is a fair and accurate description of that APR, but it describes it over a year. Somebody would have to do 26 consecutive payday advances to actually pay that. Mm-hmm. You pay $15 for $100. That's what people understand.
Mm-hmm. Pat?
From a public company standpoint, I just was thinking about you and your stockholders and wondering about whether during a recessionary time period, margins are squeezed because there's less demand,
sure,
or is there more demand during this kind of a time period, and thus, or are there more defaults, which would also have a pinch on the profits?
Very good question. And we have no real precedent for evaluating the current economic environment over the last 12 years that we've been in business. But I would say this. Our experience in the fourth quarter and through now has been that losses have stayed about the same. Demand for the product has declined because of what Chris and I said earlier, that folks are worried about whether they're going to keep their job, whether they're going to have other types of credit available. So they've pulled in. They're not spending. Mm-hmm. They're saving, which is a good thing. Mm-hmm. Savings rate in the United States has gone up for the last 2 months for the first time in over a decade. But the long-term prospects for the business, I think, require a more stable economic environment. People need to know that they're going to have jobs. You have to have a job and a bank account to get a cash advance. And that stability word that you use, Chris, and you've used too, is very important.
Thank you.